This is a very interesting, scary story coming out of Oklahoma. Public school students in Oklahoma starting next year, they are going to be taught that the 2020 election had discrepancies. It did not. They're going to learn that COVID originated in a Chinese lab. There is no conclusive proof of that. And you know what they're not going to learn about? George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, anything like that. And this is part of an ongoing attempt to brainwash children by Christian nationalists in the state. And so let me go back a little bit. Back in December, I made a video about this. Their state superintendent of public instruction, Ryan Walters, you know him, he issued a press release saying, we have new social studies standards for the state of Oklahoma. And look at what he said. The new standards are among the strongest in the country. They were not. But he says they are pro-America, pro-American exceptionalism, because we're not special. And they strengthen civics and constitutional studies across every grade. They include Superintendent Walters' Bible curriculum recommendations and mention the Bible and its historical impact over 40 times. He was super excited about how students would now use the Bible basically as a textbook. And he said in a statement, Oklahoma is putting the Bible and the historical impact of Christianity back in school. And he doesn't mean the Crusades. But this is his goal. He wants to inject the Bible into public schools. Remember, Ryan Walters is the guy that wanted to spend millions of dollars to buy Trump Bibles to put in every classroom to make this a reality. And then he couldn't get the money he wanted. So then he bought like 500 Bibles to use in AP government class, which is the one class where you don't need outside textbooks because all the teachers already have the curriculum. But this is what Ryan Walters has been doing to try to get the Bible into public schools. And if you look at what they actually tried to pass in Oklahoma, like, let me give you an example of what he was trying to do. Because in those standards, one of the things he said, for example, first graders would be taught the purpose and meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance and the significance of the phrase under God. First graders would also have to explain the meaning of In God We Trust and the importance of religion to the American people. That's a thing they would just have to do now. What else? Second graders would be taught stories from Christianity that influenced the American colonists and founders and culture, including the teachings of Jesus, which we're just treating as fact now, all of it. Like, it's all stuff David Barton thinks about in his fever dreams. He also said we're going to teach you teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, and then in parentheses, the golden rule. Like, I assure you, the golden rule is not a Jesus original, okay? What else? In 8th grade, students would have to evaluate the role of Judeo-Christian ideals in supporting colonial demands for independence, as exemplified by the Bible being a frequently cited authority by America's founders. It was not a frequently cited authority. Okay, so for high school students, it got even worse. Like, for example, when you're studying slavery, the only time you saw Christianity and slavery together is when they talked about Christians who called for abolition. And there's just no mention of the fact that the Bible was often used to justify slavery. What about US government? Students would have to describe how the Constitution was influenced by religion, morality, and the Bible. What about world history? Students will have to describe how Christianity worked in ancient Rome, including the meanings and effects of Jesus of Nazareth's words as recorded by Matthew, which suggests that the Gospel of Matthew is like a first-person historical document, which is insane. All right. Here's another one that was very, very interesting. I'm going to show this one to you. This is in an elective class on 20th century totalitarianism. So it says students have to compare Judeo-Christian and Western political theory to communism, and specifically, they have to describe the Christian idea of the equality of souls, the Christian ideal of charity, and the renunciation of worldly wealth. Apparently, treating people as equal is a Christian thing, and charity is a Christian thing. And you know what Christians really hate? Wealth. And that's why they did not support Donald Trump. What? Like, it doesn't make any sense that they would be doing this. It just boggles the mind. But this is the sort of stuff they were pushing. My favorite version of this, though, that's not even religious, is the standards want students to summarize the political impact of Bill Clinton's impeachment, which is fair, but they make no mention of Donald Trump's 2 impeachments. So who made these policies? These right-wing Christian, who made them? Well, the people on the committee included a founder of PragerU, the right-wing misinformation YouTube channel, people from right-wing think tanks. Only 3 of the 10-person committee ever lived in Oklahoma, and there were no public school teachers or administrators who crafted those standards. Okay, so here's the thing. I've made a video about all of that. In February of this year, the Board of Education in Oklahoma had to approve those standards. They had to vote on it. But they were thinking maybe we should delay the vote because the governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, just appointed 3 brand new members to the Board of Education. Here's the thing. Kevin Stitt does not like Ryan Walters, even though they are both MAGA assholes. Kevin Stitt doesn't like Ryan Walters. So he appointed 3 people he kind of hoped would curb Ryan Walters. So they had to vote on these standards, but they didn't want to because they're new people. So what happened at that meeting? Well, here's an article from the Oklahoman back in February. Guess what happened? On Thursday, questions about the standards centered around whether the motion for their approval could be tabled for next month's meeting or a potential special meeting so that new board members could have more time to review them. One of the members asked Ryan Walters during the meeting whether it was possible to push the consideration to a special meeting. What did Ryan Walters say? He said he would prefer their approval to happen now, given what he said was an upcoming deadline to move it to the legislature. Ryan Walters knew they were trying to delay the approving his standards, and he's like, nope, we got to get it to the legislature. You got to approve it right now because we're on a time limit. We're in a time crunch. We got to get this so they approve it because otherwise we won't be able to use it in the fall. So he got these Board of Education members to approve the thing he was trying to get them to sign, right? But here's the thing we are now learning about his ploy. Why was he in such a rush to get it? Because guess what? It turns out the legislature, which does need to sign off on these, they did not need those standards for another month. So why was Ryan Walters in such a rush to do it? Well, this is from Judd Legum, who writes at Popular Information. This is how he summarizes it. Walters did not send the new standards with, let me back up for a second. Here we go. Many members have since said that Walters used deceptive tactics to pass new last-minute changes. Let me talk about this. It turns out the standards that Ryan Walters wanted these people to approve were not the ones I was just talking about. Between December and February, he personally went through and changed a bunch of stuff, and no one knew he did it. So when he was trying to get this new board to approve the standards, they were not the ones that I just told you about, the ones that have been dissected online for a while now. They were brand new ones that included shit no one had ever seen. And back to what Judd wrote. Walters did not send the new standards with his additions to the members of the board until 4 p.m. the day before their 9:30 a.m. meeting. This did not give members enough time to read the new standards, which are around 400 pages long. Some of the members said later they did not even realize that the new standards were different from the earlier version they had previously reviewed. That's why Ryan Walters was in such a rush to get them to sign it, because he changed stuff and he didn't tell anyone about it, and he wanted them to approve it before they figured it out. So there is a media outlet called NONDOC, NONDOC. They first reported that, wait a minute, the new standards that just got approved are very different from the ones Ryan Walters proposed back in December. So here's what they mean by that. Here's what the original standards said. Check this out. Analyze the significant events during the first Donald Trump administration. That's fair. Identify major policy issues, tax cuts, immigration, border security, and the expanding influence of social media. I get that. If you're teaching, high schoolers about what just happened, this is a pretty straightforward way. Yes, those are big topics. They should have a grasp of what the hell we're talking about. But look at the rest of this. Describe developments and changes in foreign policy. Yeah. Explain the responses and the impact of the death of George Floyd, including Black Lives Matter. Yeah, that's important. Evaluate the federal and private response to COVID and its lasting impact on health. Yes, very important. And examine issues related to the election of 2020 and its outcome, which is important because that last point implies like, yeah, teach kids about January 6th. That's a response to the 2020 election. So as a teacher, like, yes, if you're teaching US history and you're getting into modern history and you're trying to teach kids about the first Donald Trump presidency, those are big things you will want kids to know about. That was in the original version we saw in December. What did Ryan Walters do with that section now? Here's the new version of it. I'll zoom in. Explain the effects of the Trump tax cuts, child tax credit, border enforcement, including the Remain in Mexico policy, blah, 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 and inflation rates prior to COVID. Because who cares what happened after COVID, even though the Trump economy sucked? Look at letter C. Identify the source of the COVID-19 pandemic from a Chinese lab. What? Is that just a fact now? No, it's not, unless you live in right-wing crazy circles. Look at D, though. This is the one that got all the attention. Identify discrepancies in the 2020 election results by taking a look at graphs and other information, including the sudden halting of ballot counting in select cities and key battleground states. There was no sudden halting of it. The security risks of mail-in balloting. There are none. Sudden batch dumps. That's like a Dinesh D'Souza lie. An unforeseen record number of voters. Yeah, a lot of people voted. And the unprecedented contradiction of bellwether county trends. Like, holy shit. Instead of just saying, let's talk about the 2020 elections, they're saying specifically, the Ryan Walters version of this is, no. We got to teach kids about right-wing conspiracy theories. By the way, do you notice that George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, it's no longer in this list because he just crossed that one out entirely. So this is what Ryan Walters is doing with the standards now. He's just using them to promote right-wing conspiracies. Here's another example of what he did. This is in the original version back in December. Describe the challenges and accomplishments of the Biden administration. Yes, kids should know about what happened during the Biden administration. So what did they say? Talk about assess economic recovery after COVID. That seems fair. Describe bipartisan efforts about infrastructure. Yeah, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It was a big deal. Kids should know about that. Describe the US-Mexico border crisis. Yes, there's a lot of news about that. And then finally, describe his foreign policies, specifically the withdrawal from Afghanistan, response to Russia invading Ukraine, and the Gaza-Israel conflict. Yeah, those are important things to discuss if you're discussing Biden. What is the Ryan Walters version of this section? This is what he says. Describe the challenges and accomplishments of the Biden administration. Oh, by the way, he just crossed out all the accomplishment stuff. There's nothing about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's nothing about the economic recovery after COVID. It just says examine the border crisis and then describe the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which, you know, Republicans like because they use it to attack Biden. So he's basically brainwashing kids by using a revisionist history that just ignores anything good Democrats did. Here's one more. Remember I told you there was an elective class on totalitarianism that said describe the Christian idea of equality of souls and charity and the renunciation of wealth. He crossed that entire section out. They're just not teaching that one anymore. So again, what's the point of all this? None of these changes were made public prior to them being voted on. And Ryan Walters didn't mention them when he was telling this board, go vote on the standards now. There's another problem with this. Now that people know this is what's going on and this is what he did, there's another problem, which is that it's going to become really hard to find textbooks that spread right-wing misinformation. And this is what one of the Democrats in the legislature pointed out. Standards which deviate too far from established facts can make it hard for textbook companies to write textbooks for the state. When you start deviating from what is the norm and the truth and start coming up with your own truths and throwing in the Bible and election denying and all that, there's going to come a point where Oklahoma won't have a textbook publisher willing to align to our standards. and sell a book in Oklahoma because it's very expensive. Because this makes sense, right? You would have to write a textbook that doesn't cover the stuff every other state is trying to teach kids. You have to write a textbook that specifically promotes misinformation. And not only that, if you're the textbook company that is pushing the misinformation, why would other states that give you more business want to work with you? You're the shitty company that publishes misinformation. So it's like bad business to be the textbook company that promotes these lies, right? So it's a fair point. You're not going to find textbooks that do all this, which makes it harder to teach any of this stuff. So what can Oklahoma do about this? Well, the whole reason Ryan Walters said he wanted to rush this vote is because the legislature has to do something about it. What are their options? They could approve the standards. They could disapprove the standards in whole or in part. They could edit and amend some of the things that were written in there, right? But if they don't do anything, then what Ryan Walters gave them just moves forward. So there was a resolution this week to block this. Late last week, there was a resolution to block the standards from being approved. A Republican actually proposed a resolution to let's say no to these standards, take it back to the drawing board and make them do it again. Guess what happened to that? Here's the first line from the news article. Republicans who objected to process the standards, they filed a resolution last week to block it, but that resolution didn't make the floor agenda on Tuesday. Republicans could have voted to say no to these standards, and there was a resolution to say, let's not approve them, and they said, we're going to ignore that resolution, which means the standards just skate through because the legislature did not act on them. And what that means is right now, those are the new social studies standards in Oklahoma. And that means starting this fall, kids will be taught misinformation in Oklahoma. Why? Because Ryan Walters cares more about appeasing Donald Trump than preparing students for the future. And honestly, this is going to hurt the students, because if you're a college admissions counselor and you have an application from a high schooler in Oklahoma in the years moving forward, you're going to have to think twice about that child. Because the default thinking is going to be, sorry, this kid doesn't know enough U.S. history to succeed at the college level. We cannot admit this kid into our program. That's what this does. It sets kids up for failure because Ryan Walters and Republicans in Oklahoma do not care about education in their state. It's why they're ranked 49th in the country. So these social studies standards, they are now riddled with right-wing conspiracies. They are really, as we already knew, another way to just inject Christianity where it doesn't belong. And Ryan Walters can pretend this is not about inflicting his religion and political views on kids, but everything he says and does is in that direction. He doesn't say he wants to convert kids. He instead just says Christianity is American history, and that gives him a secular rationale for his religious goals. He doesn't have to say he's brainwashing kids. He can just say he's trying to educate them, but we all know what he's actually doing. You know, these people always complain that the left is brainwashing kids and they don't allow kids to think for themselves. And we see what they are doing when they have power. And it's literally lying to children to try to spread right-wing misinformation. Like, it's a lot easier to get kids to believe lies when you refuse to ever tell them the truth. And what was Ryan Walters' reaction after the legislature chose not to do anything about his standards? This is what he posted online. Today is a major victory for Oklahoma families and for the truth. No, that's literally a lie. After months of Democrats and the teachers' unions lying and attacking, the most unapologetically conservative, pro-America social studies standards in the nation are moving forward. So Democrats and teachers' unions were like, this is a politically biased, religiously biased set of standards. And he's like, no, it's not. You're lying. And now he's like, you guys, I passed the most conservative agenda ever. For nearly a year, we engaged in a thoughtful, no, transparent, definitely no, process to deliver standards that teach students factual history, no and no, including the realities of the 2020 election, because Ryan Walters is a denier, the COVID-19 pandemic, which he's also a denier of, and the threat posed by China. Okay, these reforms will reset our classrooms back to educating our children without liberal indoctrination. Because again, they equate liberal indoctrination, that's reality, but they call it liberal indoctrination. And so he has to swing the pendulum from the center to his side. And it's right-wing indoctrination and lies, which he now pretends is neutrality. So, and look, he just admits it right here. As part of these standards, the Bible will now be recognized as a foundational text. Can't understand our nation's history without the Bible. His book of mythology is now treated like a history textbook. Again, seriously, if you have the chance to get your kids out of an Oklahoma school, you are better off, because this is what their public schools are doing, and Republicans in the state don't have the courage to push back against it. Unbelievable, unbelievably stupid. For what it's worth, and I don't know how serious this is, it may be premature. And the only reason I say that is because Americans United for Separation of Church and State and a group called the Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, they have issued a statement condemning the new standards, and they say they plan to take action. I'm quoting here. "We are preparing to take the steps necessary to protect the religious freedom of all Oklahoma public school students and prevent these standards from undermining public education in Oklahoma." They're preparing to take the steps necessary. What does that mean? Are they going to file a lawsuit over this? I hope so. They haven't done it yet, but that to me is reading between the lines. That's where they're going with this. I hope they do it, because they got to act fast before these standards actually get implemented when the school year starts up again next fall. All right. I am doing this. A listener is saying an injunction has been filed. I don't know if that's true. I haven't seen it for myself. I hope you are right about that. But again, this is what's going to have to happen. You have to get the courts to put a stop to this, because this is not history.